In this GitHub tutorial, we're going to walk through GitHub's basic Git commands. Welcome back, source coders. In the last video, you'll recall that we created a GitHub account and a GitHub repository. In this beginner tutorial, I'm going to walk you through using basic Git commands to initialize and push a new project to your new GitHub repository. So, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get to it. So the first thing you need to do is sign into your account. And once we're in, we'll click on the account name. And here's where we left off. And just a quick note, I'm using my account name, which I changed to Source Coder Hub. And your GitHub repository should represent what you do. It could be your name, your business name, or some other pseudonym. And also we have the repository name, which is the new project. Now, before we get started, there is an important distinction that we need to make. There are 3 locations where a file can exist. The first location is the working directory. That exists on your local computer, but outside of the Git world. After we initialize a Git repository, we can move a file from the working directory to the second location, which is the local Git repository, also called the staging area. And that is the space between the local Git repository and the remote GitHub repository, which is that third location. The remote GitHub repository resides on the GitHub server. And these 7 lines of code below are some of the Git commands that help us perform the operation of moving files between these 3 locations. So let's look at these commands line by line. Echo new project readme creates a new empty file readme that exists outside of the Git world. Normally, you would do this yourself in your working directory, but GitHub helps us eliminate this step initially by just creating this file in waiting. Why? Because you really can't initialize a local Git repository without some sort of starter file. Git add copies files from our working directory to the local Git repository. The file is staged so the commit is tracked and is prepared to be committed to the remote GitHub repository. If we type git status, we would be able to see that the file is tracked. Git commit initializes or starts up the local Git repository with the README file and creates a Git folder inside the new project directory. Also, the Git folder contains files and folders that hold a record of your last commit to the local GitHub repository. Git commit sets the file to be sent from the local Git repository to the remote GitHub repository. Git branch main sets the pointer to the main branch as the branch that should be used to make the file live on the internet. Get remote add origin indicates the remote URL location where your local repository will be pushed. Finally, git push origin main pushes the file up to the remote GitHub repository. Let's initialize Git and get these files up into GitHub. We're going to copy this entire code block into a clipboard by clicking on the copy icon. Go to Visual Studio Code and click File, Open File, navigate to the new project folder. Click on Terminal, then New Terminal, and you can close the debug console. Paste those lines of code copied from GitHub here and hit Return. So now when you go back to your GitHub account and click on New Project, you'll see that the README file was added as your first commit. Let's modify the README file. Go to Visual Studio Code and in the README file under New Project, let's type this as an update to the README file and then save it. On the terminal line, let's follow the process to get the file up to the remote GitHub repository. Type git add readme.md, exact file name and extension. To find out if it was added, type git status and then hit return. You'll see that the text color is green, which means that the modified file has been updated in the local Git repository and it's prepared to be committed. Then we type git commit and M for message updated README file. And now the file is set to be pushed up to the remote GitHub repository. We type git push origin main and the file is pushed up to the remote GitHub repository. Let's go to the remote GitHub repository to see that change. Go over to GitHub and click New Project, and we see that the README file was updated. Now let's add a new file. Head back over to Visual Studio Code, and we're going to add 2 new files. There are 2 ways to do that. You can use the echo keyword and the file name. But then you're prompted to add other parameters. Just return on that. But another way, my preferred way, is just to use the keyword code, and you type the file name and hit return. Then you go up to the body of the file and you type some text like this is a new text file and save it. Then you type git add dot, which means to add all the new files. And when we type get status, we see the 2 new files. And the text color is green, which means that our 2 additions have been added to the local Git repository. When we get commit, we set the files to be pushed up to the remote GitHub repository. And finally, git push sends them to the remote GitHub repository. And if we go back to GitHub and click New Project, we see that our 2 files have been added. Let's go back and remove a file from the remote GitHub repository. Type git rm and the cached flag, because we only want to remove it from the remote GitHub repo. And when we type git status, green means that the new file was successfully deleted from the remote GitHub repo. We do a git commit to set the file to be removed from the remote GitHub repository. And git push actually removes it from the remote GitHub repository. When we go over to the remote repository and refresh, we see that the file has been removed. To remove a file from the local Git repository and the remote GitHub repository, we type git rm, the file name, but without the cached flag. And you see above that the file name has been crossed out and it's red. The file will be removed from your working directory, your local Git repository, and your remote GitHub repository. In most cases, we do not want to remove a file from our working directory. So we have to be absolutely careful to include the cache flag if you want to keep the file. Here we did not use the cached flag. So when we do a git commit, the file is set to be removed from the remote GitHub repository, and git push removes the file from the remote GitHub repository. And when we refresh, we see that the file has been removed. This was a very simple demonstration of using basic git commands on a small project. You can take this further by creating a website project or portfolio, pushing it to GitHub, and then deploying to GitHub pages. Before we go, if you found value in this tutorial, don't forget to like and share this video. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell button. If you're new to GitHub, check out the GitHub tutorial part 1 on creating a GitHub account and repository. The link is on the card at the end of this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'll be walking you through building a CRUD application, which is part of the React Redux 2023 series. If you want to be the first to know, connect to the Hub, Source Coder Hub's newsletter. Together, we share knowledge, code, and community. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.